Windows updates. In this nugget, we discuss Windows updates. The first thing we'll talk about is just what I call independent updates. That means you're working on a workstation that does not contact a centralized Windows Update server of some type. You're actually contacting Microsoft's servers directly. And so that would be independent updates where you configure that on each workstation. And then we'll talk about WSUS updates, or Windows Server Update Services, which is definitely the way to go in almost any organization of nearly any size, because it's able to centrally administer these updates for you, and you don't have to visit each workstation and manually do the update process. All right, let's go ahead and talk here about Windows Update. Now, I thought about putting together a few whiteboards to show you this, but the reality is the interface shows us as good as anything, so let's get right to it and go to All Programs and Windows Update, which is also accessible through the control panel, as you can see up here. Now, one of the first things I recommend that you do on new machines with default settings is that you check for updates as soon as possible. This is especially true in home office environments or home environments. In corporate environments, this is probably not going to be as much of an issue at all, because a lot of this can be administered from on high using group policy objects and a Windows Server Update Services server. But for now, let's assume we have standalone computers or machines that are not administered by some higher level updating service. Now, before we actually click the link right now to choose Check for Updates, let me first of all show you the various settings that you can click on here where it says Change Settings. Notice that I turned off updates for the time being. That was only because I wanted to actually show you the update process, and I didn't want to have the updates already here. Notice these somewhat self-explanatory items. Of course, you can install updates automatically. That's recommended. You can download updates, but let you choose when to install them. Or check for updates, but let you choose whether to download and install them. These have some somewhat obvious reasons why you'd want to do the different ones. For example, on the checking updates, you might want to do that if you're in an environment where you have a very slow link. Maybe the only internet connection you could get was a dial-up connection, and the next update that's supposed to download to you is Service Pack 1 for Windows 7. Wow. That's likely to be hundreds of megabytes in size if it's like any of the other service packs that Microsoft comes out with. They don't do any of those small. So I would hate to do that over a slow connection. So you might just check for updates, but choose whether or not to download them. And I would choose this setting if I were frequently in that situation. But if you choose to download updates but let you choose when to install them, that gives you a little bit more control over the reboot process. Because especially on standalone computers, a lot of those updates require a reboot. And if you're not attending the computer at the time, it'll show you that a reboot is necessary, and then it'll start a kind of a countdown timer. And if you're not right there at the time that it starts to reboot, then you might lose some data, for example. You can also just choose Install Updates Automatically, and that would then install the updates, and if necessary, also reboot the computer. A lot of applications nowadays do not require you to restart the computer, but a lot of the updates, such as the Windows updates, will require you to restart. The reason for that is it may replace a critical Windows system file or a DLL or something else like that that has to be locked and in use while the operating system is running. And it's only by restarting the computer that you can truly overwrite that file with a new copy that's been downloaded as part of an update. You can also schedule when this happens. Actually, let me make a setting here. Let me check for updates, but let me choose whether to download and install them for the time being. And I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to return to this dialog box here as soon as it's done checking. And now then we see here that it has 26 important updates available and 43 optional updates available. The important ones are going to be things such as security fixes. Those are the ones that you really need to make sure that you install. Also, notice the notification area down here where it identified that there were updates available. Now, another way of doing this, if I go back into the changing the settings, is to have this automatically occur. And if I do that, look, it's going to install new updates every day at 3 a.m. And it'll just happen automatically. This is what I recommend for most home users or small businesses or any environment where they don't have somebody there who's really pretty technically savvy and can manage these updates for the user. Okay, that's usually what I would recommend in that case. But for our purposes, I'm going to go back here where we were just a moment ago and take a look at these updates. You can click the link to actually view which updates they are, and you can then select or deselect all of them, and you can then say, I only really want, I don't know, the malicious software removal tool, whatever that is, or this thing here. Okay, so I can then check that and then click OK, and then it will install just that one update. And we can see here a little bit of a description about what it does. If you want to know more about it, then you can either reference this knowledge base article by doing a search for it on Microsoft's website, or they should show it to you here as well under the More Information section, and it should take you right to that link. But anyway, getting back here, if I were decided I want to install that one, then of course I'll just click OK, and then it will just go ahead and go about installing that one update once I click Install Updates. Then we see here it gives us a little progress bar on the download and the installation. And when that's done, we'll go ahead and continue on. Notice that as it has finished downloading, now it's also creating a restore point. We'll talk more about restore points later on here in this series, but this is a pretty important juncture, because if the update for some reason creates more problems than it solves, like maybe it has a collision with one of the applications I've got installed, well, a lot of these updates you cannot uninstall them. Very few of them are reversible. So the only way to go back in time in this case would be to go back to a previous restore point, most ideally the one that it's creating right now. And just in brief, the restore points are kind of like a time machine where you can just go back to a previous point in time, and it identifies the registry settings and the files that are registered and everything like that on the computer. And if you go back to a previous restore point, it's pretty much the same in time as if you went back in time. And then once that's been done, we see that the update did take place, and we can look at some additional important updates if we want to. And then we can also look at some optional updates. Now, one of the things that I want to show you here that's really something I like a lot is a difference between what we see here and what we saw in Windows Vista. In Vista, there would be a bunch of different language packs, which, by the way, these add up in terms of megabytes. And I don't think I really need all of these, because I only understand a couple of languages anyway, and, besides Pig Latin. So what we can do here is we can get rid of any of the ones that we don't understand anything about. And I'm just going to select all of these for the time being. And under Windows Vista, there's no way to select all of them and then hide all of them at once. You had to go through each individual one, right-click each one, and choose Hide Update. But now we can choose Hide Updates, plural, after having selected them all, and they are all now hidden. And we won't be nagged about these updates anymore. Then returning here, you can also go to the update history, which will identify any updates that have been installed and when. You can also see here that if I want to, I can view more details about it and get more data about this as well. And this is pretty much the same summary that we saw when we installed the update. If I had a problem with one of them, maybe this one caused me a problem, I could go to the Installed Updates item, and then I could select that item, and with this one, I might be able to uninstall it. Again, some of them you can, some of them you can't. Looks like this one I can. It'll also tell you in the summary whether or not the update is uninstallable, so if you're a little bit concerned about that, you can check that in advance if you want. And then we see that this is now gone. Notice also that this actually appears under Programs and Features, so that if you go into Programs and Features, this will identify where you normally have applications that you want to uninstall. Like if I wanted to uninstall that, I could. This is where you're going to find the installed updates that you can then remove. All right, let's go ahead and take a look also at how to work with updates in a corporate environment where you have something called a Windows Server Update Services server. Now, what this provides for you with WSUS, or again, Windows Server Update Services, is you have a centrally administered updates server. This is a location where administrators can view the updates as they come down to the server, and they can decide whether they want to approve or reject any of these updates. Actually, it's called decline. You can approve them, or you can decline the updates. And so that's where you make that decision. You can then associate them also with various groups. For example, you might have one group, and this is not a security group. This is a unique and distinct group that's made in WSUS. And you can have a group that's for your servers. You can have a group that's for your clerical workers. You can have a group that's for the accountants and whatever. Depending upon what kind of a security situation each one of them is in and what kind of operating systems they're running and so forth, you may determine what kinds of updates you want to apply to each one of those groups. And then it's also got a really good reporting engine. This works in conjunction with SQL. In most cases, you can also use a local database, but you're better off if you use SQL. It gives you better expandability and allows you to use multiple WSUS servers that will ultimately then share the same SQL database. Also, with this, it'll identify any computers that either need updates or have failed their updates. It may be that the update got interrupted, or there was some kind of a condition that prevented the update from completing successfully. So those sorts of things could also apply, and you can view those reports as necessary. The kind of updates you get will be just general updates, things such as security updates, bug fixes, things of this nature. Drivers are also available. In fact, there's quite a few drivers that become available. And it's not going to prompt you to install, or rather to approve or decline each and every one of them. You can look at WSUS in a filtered way such that it'll only show you drivers or updates that certain computers actually need. So you don't have to go through all of them, because there's a lot of those. There's also feature packs, service packs, Microsoft Office, and various other items such as different servers. Like if you had an Exchange server, you could also approve or decline updates for that one as well. Incidentally, almost everything you're going to probably approve of, because there's so many things that are important in the updates that Microsoft provides, particularly relating to security. And if it's a rather critical or important update, you really need to approve those probably, unless you have some other reason to know that it will not work in your situation. With WSUS servers, they're so capable of administering, or rather distributing updates to so many clients that you could actually go up to 25,000 clients per server, according to Microsoft. Although I would never do that. I would have several WSUS servers probably distributed in a large organization like this, in such a way that they could provide good service to different geographic locations and so forth. You configure all of this stuff with a group policy object. Now I'm going to show you that, but I'm also going to show you the WSUS server itself, just so you can kind of get an idea for it. You don't need to know any of the things that I'm about to show you there for exam purposes, but the group policy objects are going to be more pertinent to what you need. But for sake of context, let's go ahead and take a look at least at a WSUS server like I have here. And so here you can see I've got a kind of a filtered view. I want to see any update. Okay, that's the approval item. Any update except those that have been declined. In other words, the ones I've already rejected. So this will include, for example, stuff that I've already approved of, and you can see that a great deal of these, in fact all of these in this case, have already been shown up as installed updates. Then I can also choose unapproved updates that are still needed, or failed or needed. And this is usually the view that I have. So I'll click on refresh here, and then it will then show me unapproved updates that I need to approve of that are failed or needed. And you can see at this current time, pretty much up to date. Now if I had an update that was not yet, let me go back to that previous view here. Let me just go to any and any. If I was in a position where I had an update that I knew I needed to approve, then I would right-click on that update, and you can use Shift or Control to select multiple items. And then what I would do is to right-click and then choose my approvals. And I've got this filtered, so it's going to show me a whole boatload of updates here in just a moment. So it's giving me an hourglass for a little while. I guess I just need to give this another moment. But when it comes up, I will resume recording, and we'll take a look at some of these updates. Okay, here we go. So let me go and scroll on down here. For example, whatever that is, some kill bits for what Windows operating system is this? Windows Server 2003. Okay, so for this one, if I wanted to approve that update, I would right-click on it, choose Approve, and then it's pretty simple. I just choose Approve for Install, and then I can apply that to all of the other machines down here as well. If I did not want it to apply to these computers, I could say Not Approved, but I do want it to apply to these computers. So you can distinguish between all of these as necessary. And this is also a good example of one of those updates that I was saying earlier, does not support removal. So then I would click OK. Sometimes you'll get a license agreement that you also need to approve of here in this interface as well. And then if you don't want to just look at all updates, but only the critical and security updates, then you can also look at both of these views as well. There's also WSUS updates, and these relate to the update engine that's on each client, because they have to actually have an update piece of software that reaches out to the server and checks for updates and then downloads them as necessary. Now, all of the updates that I approve on my WSUS server will go absolutely nowhere unless I create a GPO that wakes up my clients, so to speak, and tells them and makes them aware of my WSUS server, because apart from that, they have no way of knowing that the WSUS server is even there. So this is where you would configure this. And notice that I'm in the Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components. And then we're all the way at the bottom of the list here at Windows Update. And before I start configuring these, let me also point out that one of the big advantages of WSUS is that you only have to download an update one time to the WSUS server. Imagine that, downloading the next service pack of 500 megabytes, let's say, that compared to 1,000 workstations all downloading that 500 megabyte update on their own individually to each one of the workstations. The bandwidth difference is just staggering. So here we can just download it once and then apply it from the WSUS server to all the clients. Now, how's all this work out? I'm not going to exhaust all of these because they're not all quite relevant, but I do want to point out the ones that are more important or interesting. You know what? I'm going to go through all of them. Let me just do that real quick. I'm just going to double click on the first one. And then this one says, allow automatic updates immediate installation. This means that it's not going to pause or wait a while. This is only going to apply to those updates that do not require some kind of intervention or a restart. Okay, so any of those types of updates will automatically apply, and it should be fairly transparent to the user. You can also allow non-administrators to receive update notifications, and that's normally okay. Usually an administrator on like a standalone workstation would have to download and approve of the updates. Now you can also override that in Control Panel if you're an administrator and you want to do that. But here I'll just do it on a policy-wide basis, and then if I click on Next, I can allow signed updates from an Intranet Microsoft Update Service location. So this just simply means that if it's a signed update, it doesn't have to be a Microsoft update, but it can be an Microsoft Update Service location. So what that's saying is, I might have a WSUS server that I have a signed update on from a third-party vendor that we allowed to be hosted on that server. It's not really pertinent in my situation, so I'm going to click on Next, but you could enable that, and again, it has to be a signed update. You can also allow automatic updates detection frequency, so I could check how often it will check in with the server. This is going to be initiated from the client side, where it's going to reach out every 22 hours by default to see if there are any updates available on the server. And then this is the important one right here. This is one of the really important ones. I have to identify what behavior I want when there are updates that are available. I can automatically download and notify the user for installation, or I can do any of these other items. What I'll very often do in places where they don't have their own administration, or I have users that are not particularly educated with updates, I'll just auto-download and then schedule the install. And then it will happen every day, okay, or on a specific day if you want. By the way, updates normally come out sometime on Tuesday. It's kind of called Patch Tuesday or Update Tuesday, and it may come out on other days of the week only if it's a fast-moving threat, like the latest worm or something that's really sweeping the planet. Then that could come out on any other day. But normally it's going to be Tuesday, but I'll just leave it every day. And then the scheduled install time, what you want that to be. Normally at 3 a.m. There's not much going on most systems, so I can leave that at that setting, and that should be pretty good. So be aware of these settings for certain. And then I can also delay restart for scheduled installations, and you can wait 5 minutes or longer. You can just specify whatever time you want in here. And I usually wait a good while because during a workday, if the user gets the update, then I figure if the average workday is probably about 8 hours, then I might want to put at least 8 hours in here so that if it does restart, hopefully it's at least after they have already left the building, and hopefully they've saved and closed all their documents. And then the next setting here would be relating to on the Start menu after updates are available, where it gives you exactly this, which says Install Updates and then shuts down your computer. So if I click that item, that's what it'll do, and it's closely related, by the way, to the next setting here, which says Do Not Display Install Updates and Shut Down. So if I decided I don't want users to see that option, then I'll leave this setting and make it enabled, actually. And then I can also enable client-side targeting. What this means is anybody that is subject to receiving this policy, maybe I'm linking it to an OU, then I might add them to whatever target group I call this. So I might call this, workstations. Okay, something like workstations, something like that. And then all computers that read this policy will automatically be added into the workstation's target group. Again, this is not the same as a security group that you can add computer accounts to. Okay, it's a little bit different than that. Otherwise, if you don't have client-side targeting, then you would do this on the server, and you would just drag and drop the various clients into the appropriate group. That really only works for smaller environments, because that's a lot of dragging and dropping if you have thousands of clients. So for larger organizations, you're going to usually choose enabled, but I'm going to leave that for the time being. And then you can also enable Windows Update Power Management to automatically wake the computer. This is interesting because it does allow a computer that is in hibernate, and that's important to know. It only works really with Hibernate, not necessarily with Sleep in the same way. Then, if it's in Hibernate and it's time to update, then it can wake up the computer and perform the updates. The next setting here says no auto restart with logged on users for scheduled automatic updates. So that normally there's going to be an automatic restart that takes place with some of these that require a reboot. If this is configured to enabled, then it's not going to automatically restart. And that could be a little less disruptive. The only problem with that is some users, especially laptop users, never actually turn off their computer or restart their computer. They just close the lid, and it may be days or weeks before that system ever actually gets rebooted, and it's not going to actually have the appropriate security updates until it has been properly rebooted, and in fact, it may also not be able to accept additional updates until it's been properly rebooted. So that's something you have to consider a little bit. Because it depends upon a user action, which you may not be able to depend upon right here. Okay. Then this next one is reprompt for restart with scheduled installations. That just gives the user a prompt that they'll see down in the notification area, very similar to what you normally see if it downloads updates in the background. And you can tell them that it'll wait again, 10 minutes. I usually give mine a little bit longer, like 60 minutes or something like that in most organizations, but it's up to you. It's kind of arbitrary. You can also reschedule automatic update scheduled installations so that if they missed their update period, maybe it was a laptop user that was out of the office at the time the update was supposed to happen, then you can say as soon as they reconnect to the network, wait X number of minutes. Now 1 minute is not really a lot of time because a lot of systems are still booting up and still loading up their services and so forth after, within that minute. So I'll usually give it a little bit more time, maybe 10 minutes or something like that. Again, somewhat of an arbitrary setting depending on your own preferences. Now this one is a very important setting. You must know about this. You have to specify the intranet Microsoft Update Service location, and you click Enabled here, and then you have to enter in the HTTP location of your update server. And for this setting, you'll have to identify the actual update server because you see WSUS servers have IIS installed on them, so they're contacted via HTTP. This could also be done via HTTPS if you've configured it that way. Now, what we do is we just enter in the HTTP address of the server, and the clients will contact that at their next update interval according to the other settings that you've specified back here. It doesn't have to be part of your own domain. It just has to be reachable on the network, and that was an important setting there. You can also turn on recommended updates via automatic updates as well, which pretty well explains itself, and turn on software notifications also. And it's kind of useful if you want the user to have some input on whether or not they accept those updates, because they can see more detail about these software notifications, and very often those are going to be more like optional updates that you could specify. So that's pretty much it. You can see a lot of different configurations that I've made in here, and we close that up. And then at the next time that the clients actually perform a check against their WSUS server, they'll receive these settings from the group policy and apply the updates as necessary. Now then, over here on the client side, you may see a notification message down here that updates are available. If I click on Start All Programs this is after policies have been applied. Let me go ahead and do that right now, in fact, before I forget. I'm going to go do a GP update force. And now you've seen me use that command before. And I think the policy is already applied here, but I'm just going to give it a kickstart just to double check. And then what will happen is when you go into the update settings, you'll see that a lot of the settings are now locked out because they're being configured by administrative policy via GPO. So we'll go ahead and go to All Programs here, Windows Update. And we can see that if we go to Change Settings, if we can here somewhere, then indeed we cannot modify any of this because it's all configured, as it says up here, in this case by group policy object. And so then again, once the policies have applied, then I can check for updates on the computer. Oh, and this just kicked in. I didn't even click the little button. Apparently it was doing it while I was talking here, and then it identified these updates that are actually available from the server. So then I would click it, and there's quite a few updates there, so that would take quite a while to apply, but that's pretty much the end of it. Now we have automatic updating taking place. And then I also wanted to just quickly go over here. This is actually after all of these updates have occurred. Many times, especially if there's a lot of backlogged updates, like in our case, then it'll have to apply a few updates, and then it'll have to restart. It may have to restart a couple of times because some updates cannot be installed until previous updates have already been installed. But anyway, what I'm trying to get to here is there's a Windows Update log file. We don't see the extension right now, but it actually ends in .log. And this is, as you can see, is in the Windows directory. This shows you verbose information about all of the updates that have taken place. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And there's actually a paper on Microsoft's website about how to decipher all of this, because who knows what some of these things are. But there's a document, and I'll actually take you to the link here in a minute, that identifies how to interpret some of the meaning of some of these things. But if you're having severe problems with updates, probably not with just a single one, a single client, but if you have a whole department that's not getting their updates right and there's some things going wrong, you might want to check into one of the machines and look at their Windows Update file and see if it identifies any errors for you. And then here's the article. Actually, there's two of them. There's this one right here, and you can make note of the knowledge base article. Really, all you need is the number 902093, and you can search in any Microsoft web page to find that. And this identifies how to interpret the various numbers that you'll see in various places and so forth, and all of the different components that are involved in it. And then if you have specific troubleshooting issues with your updates, then this article is actually very good on troubleshooting a lot of those update issues. In this nugget, we talked about Windows updates. We started off by talking about independent updates, which is where a computer does not depend upon a centralized WSUS server to get its update information and a group policy object to get the configuration. If you have something like this, you have to visit each machine separately to configure all of these update items. However, if you use a WSUS server, then a GPO will help to leverage the capabilities of WSUS so that you can centrally administer all of your updates and then apply how they configure how they apply to all of your various clients. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.